All right, so this morning we are in Jeremiah 48, and Jeremiah is, these are the different oracles to the nations. Now they would fit really after Jeremiah 25, but they have been placed here at the end of Jeremiah, or near the end, and they're going to the different nations. And so far there's been a word to Egypt, and then there was a word to the Philistines, and now there's a word we go from the west and the south in Egypt and the Philistia, over to the east to Moab. Go to Moab here in Jeremiah 48, and it's a long chapter. It's, I believe, 47 verses this morning. Now, we're gonna try to do all 47 verses, although I'm not going to be able to hit them with the same detail that I normally do. First of all, it was a lot getting through 47 verses of preparation this morning, so that was that. And I thought about splitting this up as I have other chapters, but there is a level of redundancy at different points. It's not necessarily redundant, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but I think we can we can spend one day in Moab and then continue on. It's a very long oracle. Other than Babylon, no other nation receives as lengthy of a word from the Lord as does Moab. And the thing is, we don't have a ton of historical material or historical context necessarily. We have a little bit that would kind of bring all of this off the page. So we get certain principles that we see of the Lord, but in terms of specific detail, we don't have all of the detail that would indicate specifically how Moab had functioned in a way that would draw this rebuke from the Lord. Other than there are some general things that we can look at. So it's widely held that in 605, after the Babylonians defeated the Egyptians at Carchemish, and when they were seeking to consolidate the nations in the area under their power, it's widely held that Moab at that time submitted to Babylon. And so that it was then that later there would have been probably a Moabite rebellion, so that because what the historical records do show is that in 582, 4 or 5 years after the fall of Jerusalem, that Nebuchadnezzar basically brought an end to Moab, that he came in and brought ruin to the cities of Moab, and that was basically the end of Moab as an independent nation, never to have risen again, never to have risen again since then as an independent nation. So prior to their own destruction, though, Moab was sort of this like neighbor that was never a friend of Israel, was never an ally of Israel. They sort of rejoiced over their brothers, their ancient brothers' difficulties, and they participated at times in coming against Israel, and so that was so. We'll kind of get this. You almost have this picture of kind of an arrogant brother, half brother, whatever, who is arrogant, but they don't have a whole lot to be arrogant about, but they just talk a big game, and they just want your demise. It's someone who's right there, is never for you, but they're, that's kind of the sense you get about Moab in this picture. We do read in 2 Kings 24:1, verses 1 through 4, which if you could add that in, Antonio, that's the only passage that we have to add in today. 2 Kings 24, verses 1 through 4. We do read this. It says, in his days, in verse 1, it says, in his days, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded. So Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years, but he turned and rebelled against him. Verse 2, then Adonai sent against him marauding bands of the Chaldeans, so those are the Babylonians, the Arameans, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. He sent them against Judah to destroy it, as was the word of Adonai that he had spoken by the hand of his servants, the prophets. Surely at the command of Adonai this happened to Judah, to banish them from his presence, because of all the sins of Manasseh and all that he had committed, and also because of the innocent blood that he had shed, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood that Adonai was not willing to pardon. So one of the things I want to talk about this morning before we hit all of these verses is one of the challenges that we often have with our understanding from our own human perspective, with the way the Lord works in regard to the nations surrounding Israel and the nations in their interactions with Israel, is this sense of like, hey, wait a minute, Lord, what is it? Like, it doesn't feel fair. You're using them as you commanded them to go in and do these things, or you're using them as the tool of your destruction. Like later we'll see this with Babylon in particular, that the Lord has said, Nebuchadnezzar is my servant, Babylon is his tool, he's called it his army. And then later, because of the way they have behaved against God's people, the Lord then brings judgment against them. And you feel like, well, that's not fair. If you commanded it, like if they're doing this at your command, why are you then judging them? Now, we could respond with a very simple, well, I don't know. God's God, and God can do what God wants to do. Don't question the Lord, and that's valid. But yet, I think in our hearts we try to understand, because we recognize the character of God, and we're trying to understand the character of the way God works, and in a way that doesn't form him into our image, but does bring us understanding as to who he is. And because he is a God of justice, is to say, Lord, okay, help us to understand what is just. Because from our perspective, if you were a kid and someone gave you an instruction, go and hit that person, and you went and you hit them, and they said, come here, why'd you hit that person? You're in trouble for hitting that person. You'd be like, what? Just a second. You told me to hit him, right? So with that perspective, I want to give us kind of a broader perspective of, I think, my perspective of how the Lord operates in all of this, so that even though we are limited in our own wisdom and our own scope of understanding, we need to understand this, is that while God is in control, he is sovereign, he's in charge, God is not controlling. We're not puppets on a string. He knows, he sees our hearts, he sees the decisions we make of our own volition, he sees what's in our heart and can see what we intend to do. And yet, though, just because he sees that doesn't make that, doesn't mean we're puppets on a string, doesn't mean it's not our will. He's not controlling us. We are acting in our own volition. And so what I imagine, and what you can imagine with me, is imagine a group of kind of wild kids, right? A classroom of renegade kids, wild children. And so the Lord is over these, and he takes the smallest, the weakest, the puniest of them, and he says to that puny one, listen, I want to use you. You're going to be the one who, in this group, that you're going to lead. Okay, and you're going to show what it is to walk with me. So I want you to trust me. They're going to come against you, but I'm going to protect you. So you got to do everything I say, okay? You listen to what I say. I know they're bigger than you. You listen to what I say, okay? You walk in my ways, and I promise you that you'll be blessed, and that those who, if anyone wants to hurt you, it's going to hurt them. Okay, but those who begin to come alongside you and begin to get and follow your example, they're going to be blessed. Okay, so that's what. But I'm going to use you in this group of renegade children. But so at first you begin the little puny guy begins to experience some blessings and begins to experience, hey, yeah, this is good. But what happens is over time he starts to get a little cocky. Starts to think, well, this is about me. He starts doing what the big guy, he starts following their lead, trying to impress them, rather than following the lead of the teacher in the room, as it were. and you're going, and the Lord's going, no, listen to me, look at me, follow me. And eventually there gets to this point of where the little puny guy has really gotten full of himself, and he's taken his eyes off of what this was all about in the first place. And he keeps rejecting. No, I got this. No, I've never been hurt. No, I'm safe. No, you know what? He's for me. But and rejecting the ways of the teacher, as it were, but insisting on the protection of the teacher. So there comes a point where the one in charge says, you know what? The only way you're going to learn that this isn't you, that this is me, is I'm going to step away. I'm going to step away because you're still puny. The only reason you're anybody is because I've called you, because I've put my hand of protection over you. But you think it's all about you. So I'm going to step away for a second, and I'm going to let you experience what it means to not walk in my ways, what it means to not have me there protecting you. And in stepping away, I'm not going to abandon you altogether. I'll come back. This is going to hurt, but it will teach you, so that you never go back to that level of cockiness and rejection of what I'm telling you to do, so you don't get off track again. So I'm not going to let them destroy you completely. And so the Lord steps away, keeping his eye ever on the little puny guy in the room, and knowing what's in the hearts of these bullies that surround him. He knows what's in their hearts to do. He knows they're just waiting for an opportunity to act out what's in their own hearts. And so he's actively stepping back, and he's, in one sense, it's a passive using of the volition, the will of wicked humanity to accomplish his purposes. He's not controlling them, but knowing what's in their hearts, knowing that when he steps back, that this is what's going to happen, he's going to use that for his glory. Now, it's expressed in such a way that this says the Lord commanded, right, in 2 Kings 24, the Lord commanded them. So it's expressed in a way that makes it seem active. And one could say that he is actively doing that. My perspective is that by giving us over to the will of our own hearts, it shows how much we need him. And so there's a period of time where the Lord gives over the earth to the situation. He gives over humanity to let sin have its way. Like, how come every moment of every day the Lord is not actively stepping in to stop all injustice, to stop all murder, to stop all wickedness? It's going on for a long time, right? Because the Lord is wanting us to recognize that we need to look to him, to lean on him, and to recognize his protection. And of course, he's working over a much grander, broader time scale than we are. And so there are times where the Lord has stepped away, removed his hand of protection, and now the Moabites and the Babylonians and these others act out what's in their own volition. So when he comes back into the room and says, and pulls the puny one back to himself and says, okay, you're mine. Then he looks at those bullies and he says, now I'm going to deal with you. Okay? I'm going to deal with you now because of what was in your heart to do to the weak among you. What was in your heart to take for yourself. Now I'm going to deal with you. So I don't know if that helps at all in terms of understanding that. But so as we go through these 47 verses, I know the time. It sounds like there's a certain, it's going through all of these cities, almost like from the north to the south. It almost sounds like an intelligence report is being given to the Babylonians, as it were, like to a coming invader. And so while Jeremiah himself may not personally know all the geography of Moab, the one who gives the word to Jeremiah does. The Lord of the earth, the one who made it all, is the one who knows the geography of Moab and who formed it, and now he's speaking to Moab. So verse 1. Concerning Moab, thus says Adonai Tsevaot, the God of Israel, Oi, woe to Nebo, for it will be ravaged, it will be devastated, laid waste. Kiriathaim will be disgraced and captured. The fortress will be shamed, shattered. So the oracle begins with the Lord. He says, I'm the Lord of the troops. I'm the Lord of the angel armies. And I'm coming, but I'm the God of Israel, but I've got a word for Moab. And while I'm the God of Israel, I'm Lord of all the earth. And what Moab has done has not gone unnoticed. And so kind of with the cry of woe at the beginning, woe to Nebo, there's this beginning of the kind of the mourning, the sobbing, the wailing that will break out as death and destruction advances in Moab. And so it begins with Nebo. Of course, Mount Nebo was the mountain from which Moses viewed the promised land. And so this is a word concerning a city near that mountain, near Mount Nebo, near the mountain peak. It's about 12 miles north of the Dead Sea. So you have Nebo here and Kiriathaim, and they had been cities of Reuben in Numbers 32:3 and Joshua 13:19. We see these had been cities that had been part of the tribe, had been given to Reuben. Verse 2. There's no more praise for Moab. In Heshbon, they plotted evil against her. Come, let's cut her off as a nation. You too, Madmen, it's the name of the city. It says Madmen, but it's Madmen. It's the name of a town. Will be silenced. The sword will chase you. So it says Moab will be praised no more. It says that may be a signal. We're going to read a lot about this, the arrogance of Moab. And so they love their praise. They love they think a lot of themselves. They talk a lot about themselves. And again, we'll see that. And so it's like nobody's praising you anymore, Moab. Nobody's singing your praises anymore. Those days are over. And then it uses a couple of word plays here. It says Heshbon. It says Heshbon Chashvu. Heshbon will be like a weaving will be weaved against her. So it's a play on the name Heshbon, and it's saying that now there'll be a plot against her. And then it says Madmen, it's an unidentified town, but it's a word play. Madmen Tidmi, which is, Madmen will be silenced. But again, it's a word play. Basically, that which has defined you, that which has been your source of pride, will now be associated with your downfall. The sound of outcry, and it begins to go through these several cities, the sound of outcry from Horonaim, devastation and great destruction. Moab is shattered. Her little ones have raised a cry to be heard. For at the ascent, at the going up of Luhith, they go up with continual weeping. For on the descent to Horonaim, they heard the foe's shattering cry. Verse 6, the cry is this: flee, escape with your lives, be like a tamarisk, it's a juniper tree in the wilderness. For because of your trust in your works, because of your trust in your treasures, you will be captured too. Chemosh, which is the god of a Moabite god, will go into exile together with his priests and princes. So it says Moab is sure to be broken, even as her little ones are crying out. And this, all that is known as these people ascend to Luhith, what's going to actually be going up is the bitter weeping, is the wailing. They're urged to, you're going to be like a lone tree in the wilderness, alone, vulnerable. They're urged to flee for their lives. They've always trusted in themselves and in what they can do. They've trusted in their wealth. None of that's going to be of any help now. So, and as will their trust in their god, Chemosh. Chemosh is mentioned 8 times in the Hebrew scriptures. In Judges 11:24, Chemosh is associated with Ammonite worship, and the Moabites call their god Chemosh as well. In 1 Kings 11, Solomon actually built a high place for Chemosh, and it's described as, in 1 Kings 11, Chemosh is described as the abomination of Moab. Verse 8. The destroyer, the Shaddad, the destroyer, the devastator, will come to all towns, all cities, every town. No town will escape. The valley will perish, and the plain will be destroyed. Much of Moab was like a plateau. It was like a tabletop. As Adonai has said, give wings to Moab, for she must fly and get away. Now, the phrase there, give wings, can also be give salt. It's tzitz. and it can be, give salt to Moab, for she must flee, and get away. And I'll explain that here in a second. So if you look in your Bibles, you may see under a footnote there, because there's usually a little letter by that word, give wings, or whatever is in your version, that can be to salt it. And so basically, when a destroyer would lay waste to a land and they would devastate the land, the invading army would put salt on the land, which was it was designed to render fields and lands unusable, so nothing would grow there. It would make it a wasteland. So get out of there, nothing is going to return, nothing is going to grow. It's going to be unproductive and unusable. Verse 10, cursed is the one who does the work of Adonai with slackness, and cursed is the one who withholds his sword from blood. So here now, this God is pretty intense about what's going to be happening in Moab. And so he wants those who are coming and doing his purposes to do so with vigor, to not do it kind of half-heartedly. And so it's kind of a jolting passage, but he's not to do the work of the Lord, even in this work of judgment, with slackness. Or the word for slackness has to do more with like deception, kind of doing it halfway, where it looks like you're doing work and you're not. And part of that is, and we'll see in these coming verses, it's kind of the way that Moab does, is that Moab is sort of, they posture. Whatever they do, they sort of posture. They brag, but there's nothing really behind it. Everything they do is sort of informed by this it's like laziness that's behind a picture of productivity. And so the Lord is saying, while you kind of do everything half-heartedly, and all you care about is how it looks, the ones who are coming to do my will are not to do it half-heartedly or with deception, but are to do it wholeheartedly because it's my word. Verse 11, Moab has been at ease since his youth. He has settled like wine on its dregs. He has not been emptied from jar to jar, nor gone into exile. Therefore he retains his flavor, and his aroma has not changed. So one thing that Moab was known for was her wine, but in this example, Moab is satisfied with not pouring the wine from one vessel to the other. So the picture is wine that's left on its dregs. And I want to read here the problem with not pouring wine from one vessel to another is explained this way. It says, in making wine, first the grapes were stomped, then the juice was placed into bottles or skins and allowed to ferment. During this time, the sediment, or dregs, would settle at the bottom. After 40 days, the fermented wine was carefully poured into another container to separate it from the dregs. If the dregs were allowed to remain, the wine became too sweet and thick and was spoiled. So the object lesson from nature was ultimately applied to people who had become so complacent, or had become too complacent. Moab had never felt the harsh reality of exile, so like unpoured wine, her aroma was unchanged, and she would spoil, and had become spoiled, as it were. Moab had become complacent, has not changed for the better, and so Moab's going to go into exile. It hasn't been poured from jar to jar. Moab had been under the domination of Syria, and apparently she just cooperated with her overlord, but that's going to change as the Lord will now pour her out of that security, as wine is poured from one vessel to another. The Babylonians will be the new jar that they're poured into. And so we continue, verse 12. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares Adonai, when I will send to him those who will tip him up and over, and they will empty his vessels and smash his jars in pieces. So Moab will be ashamed of Chemosh, just as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. Okay, so here you have this picture. One of the results of Moab's complacency is of stirring up Moab's complacency is that she's going to realize that her false god is not able to deliver her from the hands of the conqueror. And 200 years earlier, Israel realized the same truth for her foolishness in worshiping the idols at Bethel, with its golden calf, had basically ended up in the same kind of humbling back in 1 Kings chapter 12. And so when it speaks to Bethel, it's speaking of the golden calf that had been in Bethel that Jeroboam had put there. Verse 14. How can you say, we are warriors, and we are men valiant for battle? Moab is ravaged, its towns entered, its choice young men gone down to slaughter, declares the king, whose name is Adonai Tzevaot. So there's clarity about who's actually king here. The Lord of hosts is the king. Moab's calamity will come soon, and his downfall hastens swiftly. So it's coming soon. There has been a promise of impending doom, but now it will happen. But Moab is still pride as always. Wherever their previous prowess was, it was in military situations. Our soldiers, our heroes. How can you say we're heroes? They bluster. That's sort of what you see through Moab. They say, we're heroes. We're the strong. It's like, where's your strength now? Moab's going to be invaded. Her town's captured. And the conqueror is still not identified as Babylon. She will lose her choicest young men because the one who's coming is the king. And again, it will come quickly. Moab's fall was about 5 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Verse 17. Mourn for him, all who are around him, all who know his name, his reputation, right? Say, how the mighty scepter, the splendid rod is broken. So when Jerusalem fell and when Jerusalem suffered, Moab didn't mourn for the fall of her neighbors. She kind of gloated, said, well, we're not them. We're, look at us, look at us, look at us. And so now, though, the Lord, though, does say to others, you guys who know her for her fame, who know her big boasts, mourn for her, because this is going to be a big fall. She is shattered. So now 10 more Moabite cities are named, one after the other. Kind of just one falls, boom, 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 almost in a taunting way, but it only feels that way because of the self-exalting of Moab. That the one who lifts himself up will be brought low. The Lord brings the proud low. Verse 18, O daughter dwelling in Dibon, come down from your glory and sit in thirst. For Moab's destroyer has come to you. He has devastated your stronghold. So the city of Dibon, which was a major walled city in Moab, is now invited to come down from its perch as the capital of the country and to sit on the dry, parched ground. There's no more wine flowing. It's a dry, arid land. Verse 19, O inhabitant of Aroer, stand by the road and watch. Ask him fleeing and her escaping. What's happened? So less than a mile south of the capital, Dibon was the town of Aurora. And basically it had a fortress that guarded the king's highway. And so from that strategic point, someone could say, as they saw people fleeing, seeing men fleeing, seeing women fleeing, could say, what's going on? And here's the answer. Moab is disgraced, indeed shattered. Wail and shriek. Declare by the Arnon, Moab is ruined. So the Arnon was the river that was the northernmost boundary of Moab. So from the northernmost boundary down, it can be announced that this proud nation is disgraced. Verse 21. Judgment has come on the tableland. So that's a reference to this plateau. On Holon, Jazah, Mifa'ath, on Dibon, Nebo, Beth Diblathayim, on Kiriathim, Beth Gamul, Beth Meon, on Kerioth, Bozrah, and all the towns of the land of Moab, far and near. The horn of Moab is cut off, and his arm is broken, declares Adonai. So all these towns are mentioned, some for the second time. We've already seen several of them. But the point is, Moab's strength, Moab's horn, which is a metaphor for power, for strength, like an animal with its horn, is cut off. It's like a toothless tiger. And Moab's arm is broken. The invader is going to strike Moab with such ferocity now that we'll see that the nation will stagger like a helpless drunk. Verse 26, make him drunk. Why? For he exalted himself against Adonai. Literally, he made himself great against Adonai. He lifted up against the Lord. So he lifted up against the Lord. So now Moab will wallow in his vomit and also become a laughingstock. After all, Israel is a laughing stock to you. Was he ever found among thieves, that whenever you speak of him, you should wag the head? So basically, there's this picture of, you don't get to go, Israel, Israel, Israel. You lifted yourself against the Lord, and now the Lord is bringing you down. And rather than you've pointed your finger, you've exalted yourself against the Lord, and now there's this picture. Moab is a laughing stock. And again, it's only fitting because Israel had become a laughing stock to Moab, scorned, mocked, treated with derision. And so God is now coming to deal with those who cursed Israel, who have come against his people. He's coming back into the room, basically. Inhabitants of Moab, verse 28, leave the towns and dwell in crags, like a dove nesting in a cave's mouth. So now just run. And again, Moab is an object of derision. Instead of kind of being, they've kind of like, they've never been a powerful nation. They've been an inconsequential nation in one sense, so they've stood around like identifying themselves with the bullies, mocking the little guy, right? But they're just barely bigger. They're not like a strong nation. So when we talked about all the bullies in the room, they're just a little bigger, right? They're just maybe have been a little in their own strength stronger, and they're mocking when but they don't have anything to be proud of. They're just trying to hide out. You know what I'm talking about? Those bullies, and then you've got the one little guy who might not be able to stand on his own, but because no one's paying attention, he's like, yeah. Anyway, you know the picture. So that's kind of this picture that we have here. And so now suddenly there's nobody. All these big guys aren't there to help him. In fact, it gets turned on him. Verse 29, we have heard of the pride of Moab. Very proud he is. His haughtiness, his arrogance, his insolence, and his self-exalted heart. So you got 6 different words used here to talk about the kind of arrogance, the pride of Moab. The Lord says in verse 30, I know his arrogance, but it's a deception. It's dishonest. His boasts really accomplish nothing. Moab's proud, but the only thing they're known for is their pride. They're not actually, they make wine, but nobody's like, oh, the Moabite wine. They're what they're known for is their kind of ridiculous, unfounded arrogance. They can be proud of being proud. So people, Moab's certainly impressed with itself, whether they think people are impressed with them, but the Lord's not. It's all been empty bluster. And so those 6 words about pride are followed now by 5 different words that the Lord brings about his own weeping and mourning. Verse 31, therefore I wail for Moab. Yes, I cry out for all Moab. For the men of Kehires I moan. More than the weeping of Jazer will I weep for you, vine of Sibmah. Your branches spread out to the sea, reached as far as the sea of Jazer. On your summer fruits and your vintage, the destroyer has fallen. So joy and gladness are taken away from the fruitful field and from the land of Moab. I stopped wine from the wine presses. No one will tread with shouting. Any shouting is not a shout of joy. So what the Lord had intended for Moab, there's what he made them to be, they've not been. They've not walked in their purposes, and they've walked in this emptiness. And so now what they have had joy about will be taken away, and it's ended with this, like these 4 words at the end where it says lo yidrok hedak hedak lo hadak, which are no one treads with a shout. The shout is not a shout. It's not a shout of joy. The only shout you're hearing is a shout of mourning. Verse 34, from the outcry of Heshbon to Eliah, as far as Jahaz, they will raise their voice. From Zoar to Horonaim, and a 3-year-old heifer, for the waters of Nimrim will also be a waste. Moreover, I will make an end in Moab. It is a declaration of Adonai, of the one offering on the high place, and the one burning incense to his gods. So the Lord's like, he's going to tear down this false worship, the Chemosh worship. He says, this is why my heart is mourning, is moaning like funeral flutes for Moab. And my heart moans like flutes for the people of Kirheres. Thus the wealth he made is lost. For every head is bald, every beard clipped. On all the hands are gashes, and around the waist sackcloth. On all the housetops of Moab and in its squares lamentation everywhere. For I have broken Moab like a jar in which no one delights. It is a declaration of Adonai. How shattered it is, they wailed. How Moab turned his back in shame. So Moab will become a laughingstock and a horror to all around him. So others will laugh, others will mock. This is what has had to happen. And the Lord weeps and mourns because this is never what he wanted to happen for the other little guy. He wanted maybe the other little guys to learn from his little guy and for his ways to extend. But instead, they turned against God's people and against God's purposes. Moab's been broken, shattered like a jar. Verse 40, for thus says Adonai, behold, this is speaking of the invader, will swoop down like a vulture and spread out his wings against Moab. The towns are captured, the strongholds seized. The hearts of Moab's warriors in that day will be like the heart of a woman in labor. Moab will be destroyed as a people. Why? Because he exalted himself against Adonai. He boasted. He lifted up his words against the Lord. It's kind of a big deal. Verse 43, panic, pit, and trap. This is kind of a staccato kind of hit with the panic, pit, and trap are upon you, inhabitants of Moab. The one who flees from panic will fall into the pit. And the one who climbs out of the pit will be caught in the trap. For I will bring on Moab the year of their visitation, the year of their judgment. It is a declaration of Adonai. In the shadow of Heshbon, the fugitives stop, exhausted. For fire breaks out of Heshbon, flame from within Sihon, and it singes the foreheads and the scalps of Moab's noisy sons. So again, there's this picture of these big mouths that the Lord is having, they are having to be brought low, that he will bring the proud, the mocker, the arrogant, the one who exalts his voice and lifts his voice. And so the Lord is saying the others will mock you, but the Lord himself is mourning over him. And he says, this is, you're gonna exhaust you, you're gonna stop, and you're gonna see this destruction. And it's gonna and the scalps of the noisy ones, they're gonna feel it. It's gonna be singed. The fire's gonna be so hot. Oi to you, Moab. The people of Chemosh, the people of this false god, the people who followed after other gods have perished. For your sons are taken away captive, and your daughters into exile. Verse 47. Yet, I will restore Moab from exile in the end of days, declares Adonai. Until then, this is the judgment of Moab. So after all of that, what you see at the end, again, is the Lord's heart is he says, it's going to take you a while to get it, right? But in the end of days, I will restore the people of Moab. I will restore Moab from their exile. And so is this picture of as bad as we are, as arrogant and stupid and foolish as we can be, having walked in whatever ways, the consequences of that, the consequences of not humbling our hearts, how long does it take the proud heart? What does it take for the proud heart to truly be humbled? There are so many who are so committed to pride, they will choose destruction over humility. You've experienced that, right? Where there's the foolishness of pride, that like what you see with Pharaoh at the Red Sea. where rather than acknowledge when the sea splits, rather than go, okay, I think I'm outmatched here. Let's turn around and let's go home. He sends his troops after the children of Israel into the sea. And that's a stupid pride, isn't it? It's a stupid pride to not recognize, to not go, I've lost. But pride can reach such a point where it's like, no, I'd rather be destroyed than admit I was wrong. So you have the pride of Moab, which is an unfounded pride. They're also kind of twerps, except they've not in any way acknowledged the way of the Lord. And yet the Lord is saying to these twerps, like, when you finally recognize, there'll be a day that you recognize who I am, and I will restore you from your captivity. I will restore you from your exile in the end of days. Until then, this is what you're going to face until that happens in your own hearts. And so we just have to walk in humility and not have hearts that taunt, but hearts that mourn. Blessed are those who mourn, right? For they shall be comforted. That we would see the world, see humanity through the Lord's eyes. All right, well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.